The city had seen many successful businessmen, but no one shined brighter than Mr. Raymond, the CEO of a worldwide company. He had everything a man could dream of: wealth, power, respect, and the ability to make things happen with just one phone call. People admired his intelligence and feared his authority. To many, he was untouchable. But behind the glass walls of his tall office, behind the sharp suits and endless meetings, there was one wound in his life that no money could heal. That wound was his little daughter, Emily. Emily was the light of his home. She was a cheerful child, full of laughter and sweet words that could melt even the hardest of hearts. But one unfortunate day, everything changed. A sudden accident took away her voice. She survived, but the shock left her silent. She could not speak a single word again. For her father, who lived for her laughter, the silence felt heavier than all the burdens of his business empire. At first, Raymond believed it was temporary. He rushed her to the best doctors across the country. Hospitals with shining floors, therapists with long degrees, specialists who were famous for performing miracles, all of them examined her. They gave medicines, suggested exercises, and offered hope. But months passed, and nothing worked. Emily remained silent. She looked at the world with her wide innocent eyes, but not a word came from her lips. The CEO, a man who could command thousands of employees, felt powerless. He sat at his daughter's bedside night after night, whispering her name, waiting for even the smallest sound. He tried every therapy, every program, and every possibility, but still there was no progress. For the first time in his life, his money and power meant nothing. The more he tried, the more he realized that the one thing he wanted most, the sound of his daughter's voice, was slipping further away. Emily's silence changed the atmosphere of the house. Where once there was laughter, now there was only quietness. Her toys lay untouched in the corner, and her little dresses hung neatly in her wardrobe, but they no longer carried the same joy. The big mansion felt like an empty shell without her cheerful words filling the air. For the staff who worked in the house, it was painful to see their young mistress sit quietly by the window every day, staring at the garden as if waiting for something. Raymond's heart broke each time he saw her. He was used to challenges in the business world, but this was different. This was not about money, contracts, or competition. This was about his only child. Late at night, when the city lights flickered and his mansion was silent, he sat alone in his study, covering his face with his hands, whispering prayers he never thought he would say. For a man who believed only in hard work and logic, it was strange to feel helpless before fate. The news of his daughter's condition spread among close friends and trusted colleagues. Some gave him sympathy, others gave him advice. But sympathy felt like pity, and advice felt useless. None of them understood the pain of a father who would trade all his success just to hear his daughter say one word, any word. Every time she opened her mouth and no sound came out, it cut his heart deeper than any business failure ever could. One evening, after yet another failed therapy session, he held Emily in his arms. Her little head rested on his shoulder, and her small hands clutched his shirt. He whispered softly, "If only I could hear you say Papa again, I would give away everything I own. Everything." His voice cracked, and tears rolled down his cheeks, tears no employee or business rival would ever imagine him shedding. At that moment, Raymond was not a CEO, not a powerful man, not the leader of an empire. He was just a father, broken and desperate, ready to give the world in exchange for his daughter's voice. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emily's condition remained the same. Therapists eventually grew tired, doctors repeated the same words, that recovery was uncertain, that patience was needed, that some wounds of the mind could never be fully healed. Raymond began to lose hope. The sparkle in his eyes, once sharp and ambitious, grew dim. His employees noticed the change in him. Meetings were shorter, his attention was divided, and often he sat staring out of the window, lost in thoughts far away from the world of business. Emily, however, remained gentle and calm. Though she could not speak, her innocence never left her. She smiled when she saw birds in the garden, clapped her hands when the rain tapped against the windows, and hugged her father tightly whenever he seemed sad. It was as if she was telling him that even without words, her love for him remained unchanged. But for a father who longed to hear her voice, that silent love was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Then came a day when Raymond called his board members for a meeting. But it was not about business. With tired eyes and a trembling voice, he stood before them and said, "If anyone at all can bring back my daughter's voice, I will give them everything I have. My money, my position, my properties, everything." The room fell silent. The employees, who had always seen him as a symbol of strength, now saw the raw pain of a father. His promise was not made out of pride or drama. It was made out of pure desperation. Those words spread like wildfire. People talked about the great CEO who was ready to give away his empire for his daughter's voice. Some believed him, some doubted him, but all understood one thing: the mighty man who once stood above all now stood humbled before the power of love. At night, as Emily lay asleep, Raymond sat beside her, holding her tiny hand. He whispered again, "I don't need riches, I don't need power. I just need you to speak. Even if it is only once." His words echoed in the silent room, and his tears fell quietly on her blanket. He didn't know what the future held, but deep in his heart, he prayed that somewhere, somehow, someone would hear his cry. And so began a story not of business, not of wealth, but of a father's love, a daughter's silence, and the tall glass building of Raymond's company stood proudly in the heart of the city. Hundreds of employees worked there every day, moving quickly between offices, attending meetings, typing endlessly on computers, and trying their best to impress the CEO. Everyone knew that the boss was a man of few words but of sharp vision. To work under him was both an honor and a pressure. Yet, behind all the noise of business and the rush of money-making, there was one person in the building who almost no one noticed: the janitor. His name was Samuel. He was an older man with kind eyes and a quiet nature. Every morning before the sun rose, he would unlock the doors, sweep the hallways, and prepare the office for another busy day. While the executives wore polished suits and carried expensive briefcases, Samuel wore a simple uniform and carried a mop. Most employees walked past him without even saying hello. To them, he was invisible, just another worker in the background. But Samuel never complained. He had lived a simple life, and though he never became rich or famous, he carried something many of the others had lost: patience, humility, and a heart that truly cared. On certain days, when Raymond brought Emily to the office, the little girl sat quietly in a corner of the CEO's room. The employees who passed by would glance at her, feel a quick moment of pity, and then return to their busy schedules. They did not know how to talk to her. She was silent, withdrawn, lost in her own little world. While others avoided her, Samuel would stop for a moment, bow slightly, and say in his warm voice, "Good morning, young lady." He never expected a reply, but he spoke anyway. His voice was gentle, almost like a soft melody, and though Emily never answered, she watched him with curious eyes. Over time, Samuel noticed something the others missed. Emily seemed less tense when he was around. While her father's colleagues often looked at her with worry or sadness, Samuel treated her as if she were just another child, not a broken one. He never pushed her, never asked her to speak, never showed pity. Instead, he talked to her the way he would to any little girl about the sunshine, the rain, the flowers outside the window, or the funny shapes he saw in the clouds. Sometimes, while polishing the floor, he would make silly faces just to see if she smiled. And slowly, she did. That small smile was something even her father rarely saw. To Raymond, this was confusing. He hired the best therapists in the world, Yet his daughter gave more response to a janitor's silly faces than to any professional's expensive sessions. He began to watch quietly from a distance. Each time Samuel walked into the room, Emily's eyes brightened. She followed his movements as he worked, sometimes giggling when he whistled or made playful noises with his broom. Samuel never knew that the CEO was observing. He was simply being himself, an old man who loved children and believed in kindness. He had once raised children of his own, though life had not been easy for him. He knew how to be patient, how to wait for small changes, and how to celebrate little victories. To him, a child's smile was worth more than a pile of gold. As the days passed, a bond began to grow between Emily and Samuel. It was not a loud bond, not one of spoken words, but a quiet understanding. When he walked past her, she looked up. When he drew funny shapes on a piece of scrap paper, she leaned closer. When he hummed a soft tune while sweeping, she tapped her little fingers on the arm of her chair, almost as if trying to follow the rhythm. One afternoon, as Raymond sat buried in paperwork, he noticed his daughter looking restless. She had her small toy in her hand, but she did not seem interested in it. Then Samuel entered, carrying his mop and bucket. He looked at her, smiled, and whispered, "Would you like to see some magic?" Emily tilted her head, curious. He took a piece of tissue paper, folded it quickly, and with a playful gesture turned it into a paper bird. He placed it gently on her lap. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in months, she clapped her hands together in delight. Raymond's pen froze in his hand. His daughter had not shown such joy with anyone else. He stared at Samuel, realizing that this humble janitor was reaching her in a way that all the experts could not. Still, he said nothing. He wanted to see where this would lead. In the following weeks, Samuel tried different ways to connect. He found old crayons and gave them to Emily, drawing simple pictures beside her so she could copy. He whistled familiar tunes, and to his quiet surprise, Emily began to hum very softly, almost like a whisper. It was not yet speech, but it was sound. That sound, however faint, filled Samuel's heart with joy. He knew then that this little girl was not lost. She only needed someone who believed in her without pressure, someone who gave her time instead of instructions. The janitor's efforts went mostly unnoticed by others. Employees were too busy chasing deadlines. They did not see how Emily's eyes sparkled when Samuel entered, or how she waited quietly for his little games. Only Raymond saw, and with each passing day, his respect for this simple man grew. He had once believed that only specialists with high degrees could help his daughter. Now he was beginning to understand that sometimes, healing comes from unexpected hands. Yet, Samuel never boasted. He never even told the CEO what he was doing. To him, it was not about recognition. It was about helping a child smile again. He believed children understood love even when words were not spoken. And Emily, though silent, was listening in her own way. At night, Raymond thought deeply about what he had witnessed. Why did his daughter respond to this janitor? Perhaps because Samuel treated her as normal, without pity or fear. Perhaps because his simple heart spoke louder than complicated therapies. Or perhaps because kindness had a language of its own, one that even silence could understand. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's bond with Samuel grew stronger. The office, usually filled with stress and formality, now had quiet moments of warmth whenever the janitor and the little girl shared their small games. For Raymond, those moments were precious. They gave him hope again, hope he thought he had lost forever. And though no one knew it yet, this quiet bond was slowly planting the seeds of a miracle, one that would soon change not only Emily's life but also her father's heart, and even the destiny of the humble janitor who had been invisible for so long. The bond between Samuel and Emily grew day by day, though most people in the office never noticed it. To them, he was just the janitor, a man who pushed a mop and carried buckets. But to Emily, he was slowly becoming something more: her friend, her safe place, the one person who never looked at her with sadness or pity. He was simply there, quietly, kindly, patiently. Raymond, the great CEO, often found himself pausing during his busy schedule to watch them. He tried not to disturb their moments. Sometimes, he stood at the glass door of his office, pretending to look at papers while his eyes secretly followed his daughter. And what he saw both amazed and humbled him. His daughter, who had been silent and withdrawn for so long, was smiling again. Her eyes sparkled whenever Samuel sat beside her. There was life in her face, as if his presence unlocked a hidden joy that no therapist had ever reached. One afternoon, Samuel finished mopping the floor and quietly walked over to Emily. He pulled a small object from his pocket, a harmonica. Its silver edges were worn out, and it looked old, but when Samuel held it in his hands, there was something gentle in the way he touched it, as though it carried stories from long ago. Emily tilted her head, curious. "Do you want to hear a song?" Samuel whispered softly. Without waiting for an answer, he placed the harmonica to his lips and blew. A sweet, simple melody floated in the air. It was not loud, not grand, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. The tune carried warmth, as though each note was stitched with kindness. Emily's eyes widened. She leaned forward, listening carefully. Her little fingers began tapping on the armrest of her chair, following the rhythm. Raymond watched silently from behind his desk. He had seen countless musicians in his life at glamorous events, but never had a tune touched him the way this one did. It was not music for fame or applause, it was music meant only for a little girl who had forgotten how to laugh. And it worked. For the first time in months, Emily let out a small sound. It was not a word, not even a clear hum, but a soft murmur that matched the melody. Samuel stopped suddenly, not wanting to push her too far. But when she looked at him with eager eyes, he smiled and continued. That day was the beginning of something new. Samuel began using music as a bridge between silence and sound. Every time he worked in the office, he would play little tunes. Sometimes they were happy, sometimes gentle, sometimes silly, but they always drew a response from Emily. She started humming faintly, then louder, and though the sounds were broken and unclear, they were signs of life returning to her voice. Raymond could hardly believe it. He remembered the countless expensive therapies that had failed. He remembered the doctors who said it might never happen. Yet here was his janitor, sitting cross-legged on the floor with an old harmonica, slowly awakening his daughter's lost voice. It was both miraculous and humbling. Samuel never rushed Emily. He never said, "Speak now or say this." Instead, he played and waited, encouraging her with smiles and small claps whenever she made a sound. If she whispered even a single syllable, he treated it like a great achievement. His patience seemed endless, and that patience gave Emily courage. She was no longer afraid to try. Outside the office, life continued as usual. Employees rushed through hallways, meetings filled the conference rooms, and phones never stopped ringing. Yet, inside the quiet corners where Samuel and Emily sat together, a miracle was slowly taking shape. It was invisible to the busy world, but to Raymond, it was the most important thing he had ever witnessed. One rainy afternoon, Samuel sat with Emily near the window. The sound of raindrops tapping the glass mixed with the gentle notes of his harmonica. Emily was humming along softly, and then, to Samuel's surprise, she tried to copy a word he whispered. He said slowly, "La." She stared at his lips, hesitated, and then whispered, "La." The sound was broken, but it was there. Samuel's eyes widened, and he clapped his hands softly. Emily giggled, encouraged by his excitement. Raymond, who had been standing behind the half-open door, pressed his hand against his mouth. His eyes filled with tears. That single syllable was more precious than all the gold he had ever owned. He wanted to rush in, to hug his daughter, but he stopped himself. He knew this moment belonged to Samuel and Emily. He did not want to interrupt the fragile progress. The next days became a practice of small steps. Samuel would play, Emily would hum, and slowly, she tried to copy simple sounds. She did not always succeed, and sometimes she grew tired or frustrated, but Samuel never gave up. He told her stories through gestures and drawings, making her laugh. He showed her silly dances with the broom, making her clap. And every sound she made, no matter how small, was celebrated like a great victory. For Raymond, these moments were a lesson. He had lived his whole life believing that problems could be solved with money, with force, with quick decisions. But here was Samuel teaching him the opposite, that sometimes, healing required no riches, no power, just patience, kindness, and time. One evening, Raymond called Samuel into his office. The janitor looked nervous, thinking perhaps he had done something wrong. But Raymond stood up, walked toward him, and said quietly, "I don't know how you're doing it, but you're reaching her. You've done more for my daughter than all the doctors I've hired." "Why?" Samuel hesitated. His voice was humble as he replied, "Sir, children don't always need medicine first. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them, someone who waits without pressure. I don't have degrees or certificates. I only have time and love. And sometimes, that is enough." Raymond stared at him for a long moment. His heart was touched by the simplicity of those words. For a man who built empires with strategies and calculations, it was astonishing to realize that the answer to his greatest problem was something so simple. After that conversation, Raymond no longer saw Samuel as just a janitor. He saw him as a man with a gift, a man who had the courage to give what others had overlooked. And though Samuel continued his work with the same humility, the CEO's respect for him grew deeper each day. Meanwhile, Emily's progress continued. She began repeating simple sounds more often. Sometimes she surprised everyone by laughing out loud, a sound that had been missing for so long. Her laughter echoed through the office halls, catching the attention of employees who had grown used to seeing her quiet. They began to whisper about the little girl who was changing, though none of them knew the real reason why. Step by step, Samuel was pulling her out of her silence, not with force, but with love disguised as games, songs, and patience. And little did anyone know, the first real word from her lips was approaching soon, a word that would shake Raymond's world and prove that sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected hands. The weeks went by slowly, yet every small sound Emily made felt like a treasure. To Samuel, each whisper was proof that her voice was still alive somewhere inside her, waiting to be found again. He never pushed her too hard. He treated every little hum and broken syllable as a victory. His patience seemed endless, and because of that, Emily began to trust him more and more. Raymond watched these changes with wonder. Each time he saw his daughter try to copy a sound, his heart felt lighter. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in months, he had hope. It was like watching a flower that had been closed tightly for too long finally begin to open again. One morning, the office was unusually quiet. Most of the employees were busy in meetings, the phones were less noisy, and the building felt calm. Emily sat near the large window of her father's office, holding a small paper bird Samuel had made for her. She touched its wings with care, as though it were alive. Samuel came in quietly, carrying his usual cleaning tools, but his eyes immediately lit up when he saw her waiting. "Shall we play today?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, her eyes sparkling. He sat down beside her and pulled out his harmonica. With a smile, he began to play a gentle tune, one that sounded like sunshine breaking through clouds. Emily leaned closer, humming along in her broken little voice. Then Samuel paused and said a single sound, "Pa." Emily stared at his lips. He repeated, slowly, kindly, "Pa." For a moment, she only hummed. Her eyes shifted between his face and the paper bird in her hand. Samuel waited patiently, smiling at her encouragingly. And then, like a soft whisper breaking through silence, she said it. Pa, it was faint, broken, and almost like a breath. But it was a word. Her first word. Samuel's eyes widened with surprise and joy. Yes, he clapped softly. That's it, Emily. You did it? His voice was trembling with excitement. Emily's face lit up with pride at his reaction. For the first time, she realized that her voice could return, that she could make sounds that others understood. Unseen by them, Raymond was standing at the doorway. He had come back from a short meeting and had stopped when he heard the faint sound. His heart stopped. His eyes filled with tears. For months he had prayed to hear his daughter speak, and now, at last, it had happened. He pressed his hand against the door frame to steady himself as tears ran freely down his cheeks. Samuel encouraged Emily again. Say it once more, my dear. Pa. Emily giggled and tried again. Pa, pa. The second attempt was clearer, louder, almost playful. Raymond could no longer hold himself back. He rushed into the room, his eyes red with emotion. Emily turned toward him, surprised, and for the first time since her silence began, she reached out her little arms and whispered, Papa. The word hung in the air, simple yet powerful, carrying all the love she had been unable to express for so long. Raymond dropped to his knees, hugging her tightly, unable to stop his tears. He whispered over and over, Thank you, thank you. His whole body trembled as he held her, as though he had been given back the most precious treasure in the world. Employees outside the office heard the sound of laughter and crying mixed together. They peeked in and saw their usually stern boss hugging his daughter, tears flowing like a river. They had never seen such a sight. The strongest man they knew, who commanded companies and markets, was now kneeling on the floor, crying like a child. But it was not weakness, it was love, pure and overwhelming. Emily, encouraged by her father's reaction, kept repeating the word. Papa, Papa. Each time, Raymond's heart soared higher. It was like music to his ears, sweeter than any success he had ever known. He turned to Samuel, who was standing quietly in the corner, watching with gentle eyes. Raymond stood up, walked over to him, and with tears still streaming down his face, said in a trembling voice, You did this. You brought her voice back. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know what to say. Samuel shook his head humbly. No, sir. She always had her voice. All I did was help her find it again. But Raymond could not hold back his gratitude. I promised the world that whoever taught her to speak again, I would give them everything I own. And I mean it. Everything I have, it's yours. The employees who heard this were stunned. The CEO of a massive empire was offering his entire fortune to a janitor. Whispers filled the hallways, but Raymond meant every word. His love for his daughter was greater than his love for wealth or power. Yet Samuel simply smiled. Sir, I don't need your riches. I only wanted to help her. That is enough for me. Raymond was speechless. How could a man who had so little refuse so much? He felt a deep respect for Samuel, greater than any respect he had ever given to powerful businessmen or world leaders. This janitor, with no fame, no wealth, and no high education, had given him something priceless: his daughter's voice, and his own joy as a father. Emily clung to her father's arm, repeating Papa again and again, as if she too knew how much it meant. Every time she said it, the room filled with warmth. For Raymond, it was the sweetest sound in the world, one he would never take for granted again. That night, as the city lights glowed outside, Raymond sat in his study, Emily asleep in his arms. He replayed the moment again and again in his mind: the first word, the way she looked at Samuel, the way she reached out to him and said Papa. It was the moment his life had changed forever. He realized then that true miracles often come not from money, but from unexpected hearts. And though the world would remember Raymond as a powerful CEO, he himself would always remember this day not as a victory of business, but as the day his daughter's voice returned because of the kindness of the day Emily spoke her first word became a turning point not only in Raymond's life but in the life of everyone who knew him. The powerful CEO, who once ruled boardrooms with confidence, now walked around with a softness in his eyes that no one had seen before. Employees whispered to each other about the change. The man who had always been strict and serious now smiled more, and his voice carried warmth. It was as if the sound of his daughter's papa had melted the ice around his heart. But above all, it was Samuel who remained the quiet hero of the story. He continued doing his job as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He still pushed his mop, carried his bucket, and swept the hallways every morning. If someone looked at him, they would never guess that this humble janitor had given back a child's voice and a father's hope. Yet Raymond could not let things remain the same. He remembered the promise he had made, the desperate vow, "If you teach her to speak again, I'll give you everything." And now that the miracle had happened, he felt bound to keep his word. One afternoon, Raymond called Samuel into his office. Emily was sitting at her father's desk, happily drawing with crayons. When Samuel entered, she looked up, smiled, and whispered, "Sam." Her attempt at his name was broken but clear enough to bring tears to Raymond's eyes again. Samuel's own heart swelled with pride. He had never expected her to say his name. "Please sit," Raymond said, his voice full of respect. For the first time, the janitor sat in the CEO's chair across from the great man, though he looked uncomfortable, unused to such formality. "Samuel," Raymond began, "you have done something no doctor, no therapist, no specialist could do. You gave me back my daughter's voice. You gave me back my life. I am a man of my word, and I promised I would give everything to the one who brought her voice back. So today, I am offering you everything I own, my wealth, my properties, even my position in this company if you want it." The room fell silent. The employees who had been asked to witness this exchange gasped softly. To them, this offer was beyond imagination. To become the owner of such an empire was something most people only dreamed of. They looked at Samuel, waiting to see what he would say. But Samuel only smiled gently and shook his head. "Sir, I don't need your riches. I don't need power or a big office. I am happy with the little I have. What I wanted was to see her smile again, to hear her voice again. And now, I have that. That is more than enough for me." Raymond stared at him, stunned. "But, you could have everything. You could change your life." Samuel's eyes softened. "My life is already full, sir. I may not have much money, but I have peace. And peace is something not even the richest man can buy. What I want, instead, is something else." Raymond leaned forward. "Anything. Name it." Samuel took a deep breath. "I grew up poor. I know what it is like to have no opportunities, no help. Many children out there, like Emily, have hidden potential but no one to guide them. Some need education, some need encouragement, some simply need someone to believe in them. I don't need wealth for myself. But if you really want to honor your promise, then use your power and your money to help children like Emily. Create opportunities for those who have none. Build schools, fund scholarships, give them a chance to find their voices too." The room went silent again, but this time with awe. The janitor, who could have taken everything for himself, had asked instead for the future of other children. His request was not for personal gain but for kindness to spread further. Raymond's eyes filled with emotion. For years, he had built his empire only for profit. But in that moment, he realized the true meaning of wealth not in what he kept, but in what he gave. He stood up, walked around his desk, and held Samuel's hands tightly. It shall be done. From today, my company will fund education programs, scholarships, and centers for children in need. And it will be in your honor. News of the decision spread quickly. Headlines across the city read, CEO launches foundation inspired by janitor's kindness. Employees who once overlooked Samuel now greeted him with respect. They realized that the quiet man they had ignored for years was the very reason their boss's life had been transformed. For Emily, life began to bloom again. With Samuel's continued patience, she slowly learned more words. She laughed more often, played with joy, and filled her home with the sounds that had been missing for so long. Each time she said Papa, Raymond's heart leaped with gratitude. And when she said Sam, the humble janitor's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. The foundation grew larger with time. Schools were built in poor neighborhoods. Scholarships were given to children who dreamed of studying but lacked the means. Parents who had lost hope found light again. And everywhere, people spoke of the story behind it all, the story of a janitor who gave a little girl her voice and asked for nothing in return. Years later, Emily grew up strong and confident. She never forgot Samuel, the man who first taught her that her voice mattered. She often told others, the world may see him as just a janitor, but to me, he is the reason I found my voice again. And as for Raymond, he too was transformed. He no longer measured his success only in profits or business growth. Instead, he measured it in lives touched, children educated, and opportunities created. The cold businessman of the past was gone, replaced by a father who understood love, gratitude, and humility. Samuel, however, remained the same humble man. He continued his work, sweeping hallways and cleaning offices, never seeking fame. But wherever he went, people greeted him with warmth and respect. To them, he was not just a janitor, he was a reminder that true greatness often hides in the simplest of people. And so, the story lived on, told again and again, the story of a father's desperate cry, a daughter's lost voice, and a janitor's quiet miracle. It became a tale not of wealth, not of power, but of love, patience, and humility. A reminder that sometimes, the greatest treasures are not found in gold or silver, but in the kindness of an unnoticed heart.